all of our interests, and particularly the government, to improve maternity services.
We can't achieve our mission unless we bring parents and professionals together.
A revolution needs to happen. We need to start working together. I know it's a hard time, but for goodness sake, it's the best profession in the world. Be proud to be midwives, be proud of the job that we do, and continue to celebrate our successes. Midwives make a difference to women every single day, and let's not lose that. It's more important than anything.
Welcome to Matflix, video streaming from maternity experts. My name is Dr. Jenny Hall. I am the box set's curator at Matflix, a fellow of the Royal College of Midwives and a former editor of The Practicing Midwife. At Matflix, we bring together videos of talks from top maternity experts into box sets to support your continued professional development, study and revalidation. It is a perfect study accompaniment for midwives, maternity professionals, midwifery students and anyone thinking about a career in the maternity services. My job is bringing together the latest thinking area by area so you do not have to. Not only do you get the video of brilliant talks and relevant content in thematic box sets, you also get access to the audio version so you can listen on the commute or while you walk the dog. Plus links to the latest research in the relevant field, government policy documents, the presenter's PowerPoint and more besides. Sign up to Matflix now for the best video streaming from maternity experts.
You're thinking, but I've never read about these midwives in the Bible, and that's because they didn't make it into the Gospels. Why was it that we nurses, midwives, seem so invisible to the doctors, to the media?
An amazing midwife said to me, you can't be what you haven't seen.
These are the world's most researched probiotic, and we can say that with confidence because we've done over 300 clinical trials on this little bottle of goodness.
These awards, as you know, are a celebration of achievement, effort, change, innovation, management, insight, and the many other traits necessary to sustain a proud profession like midwifery and consistent services in maternity.
We invite people to nominate a colleague or a student or a manager, whatever, where they think that person's a real trailblazer.
And it's really a celebration of all that's good in midwifery and maternity care.
They recognise individuals, they recognise teams, management and educators. Anyone who values excellence and makes improvements. They are essentially a celebration of all of your achievements. So, shall we get on with it? What you do with your day-to-day lives, I just admire you hugely. If you do want to nominate a colleague, a friend, maybe yourself, please speak to the organisers and visit the website, and I really hope that we'll see you at that.
Okay, now the first award is... What's
nothing, I don't know.
We have had a 40% caesarean section rate in the National Maternity Hospital. That is major abdominal surgery.
Around 40,000 mums did not return to work in 2022. It's even more relevant if you're a mum who's experienced birth trauma.
We spend more money on litigation than we currently spend on the maternity services. It's bonkers.
is that it's in all of our interests, and particularly the government, to improve maternity services.
We can't achieve our mission unless we bring parents and professionals together.
A revolution needs to happen. We need to start working together. I know it's a hard time, but for goodness sake, it's the best profession in the world. Be proud to be midwives, be proud of the job that we do, and continue to celebrate our successes. Midwives make a difference to women every single day, and let's not lose that. It's more important than anything.
Welcome to Matflix, video streaming from maternity experts. My name is Dr. Jenny Hall. I am the box sets curator at Matflix, a fellow of the Royal College of Midwives and a former editor of The Practicing Midwife. At Matflix, we bring together videos of talks from top maternity experts into box sets to support your continued professional development, study and revalidation. It is a perfect study accompaniment for midwives, maternity professionals, midwifery students and anyone thinking about a career in the maternity services. My job is bringing together the latest thinking area by area so you do not have to. Not only do you get the video of brilliant talks and relevant content in thematic box sets, you also get access to the audio version so you can listen on the commute or while you walk the dog. Plus links to the latest research in the relevant field, government policy documents, the presenter's PowerPoint and more besides. Sign up to Matflix now for the best video streaming from maternity experts.
You're thinking, but I've never read about these midwives in the Bible, and that's because they didn't make it into the Gospels. Why was it that we nurses, midwives, seem so invisible to the doctors, to the media?
An amazing midwife said to me, said, you can't be what you haven't seen.
These are the world's most researched probiotic, and we can say that with confidence because we've done over 300 clinical trials on this little bottle of goodness.
These awards, as you know, are a celebration of achievement, effort, change, innovation, management, insight, and the many other traits necessary to sustain a proud profession like midwifery and consistent services in maternity.
We invite people to nominate a colleague or a student or a manager, whatever, where they think that person's real trailblazers.
And it's really a celebration of all that's good in midwifery and maternity care.
They recognise individuals, they recognise teams, management and educators. Anyone who values excellence and makes improvements. They are essentially a celebration of all of your achievements. So, shall we get on with it? What you do with your day-to-day lives, I just admire you hugely. If you do want to nominate a colleague, a friend, maybe yourself, please speak to the organisers and visit the website, and I really hope that we'll see you at that.
Okay, now the first award is. What's
nothing? I don't know.
We have had a 40% caesarean section rate in the National Maternity Hospital. That is major abdominal surgery.
Around 40,000 mums did not return to work in 2022. It's even more relevant if you're a mum who's experienced birth trauma.
We spend more money on litigation than we currently spend on the maternity services. It's bonkers.
that it's in all of our interests, and particularly the government, to improve maternity services.
We can't achieve our mission unless we bring parents and professionals together.
A revolution needs to happen. We need to start working together. I know it's a hard time, but for goodness sake, it's the best profession in the world. Be proud to be midwives, be proud of the job that we do, and continue to celebrate our successes. Midwives make a difference to women every single day, and let's not lose that.
And good evening and welcome to this week's Maternity Midwifery Hour. It's Series 19, Session 6, and my name's Sue MacDonald. It's not just MacDonald, it's Sue MacDonald. And I'm the curator for the Maternity Midwifery Festivals and the Maternity Midwifery Hour. And it's my pleasure to be hosting this evening's session. And I'm joined by Marie Watkins. Here she is. And I'm going to do what we do every week. We invite our guest to share a moment of the week, and Marie's got something really special. So welcome, Marie, and thank you so much for coming this evening to share all the things you're going to share.
Thank you for having me, Sue. It's a pleasure. So my moment of the week, as I was just explaining, might actually be a contender for moment of the month and potentially the year as well. But we'll stick with the week at the moment. So when I'm not doing birth debriefing, I work in a school, and it's a school where my daughter goes. My daughter has autism. And there are a few other children there that have autism. And it's been a big learning curve with me about how to support those effectively. And at the weekend, we had a school open morning, and one of the children that I've been supporting most closely arrived with her sister, who's also joining the school. And she pointed me out and said, "That's Mrs. Watkins. And if you ever feel sad, you can go to her and she will help you." So that was already a contender for moment of the week. And then I said to the girl that I'm working with, "Would you like to come into the office?" I said, "We've got some snacks for the pupils and whatnot." And we went in and she gave me a spontaneous cuddle, which was one of the most amazing moments ever, because that's not necessarily a way that she would generally feel comfortable in showing affection. And it was spontaneous and it was beautiful and made me shed a tear of joy. So I'm not sure that there's going to be another another moment in the coming year that's going to top that, but it's absolutely my moment of the week, very easily.
Oh, that's lovely. And thank you so much for sharing that, because I think it illustrates how different our moments are. And that's very special, because you know that young person so well. So it has a special meaning. So thank you so much for sharing that, Marie.
You're
Now
welcome.
we're going to let Marie have a little rest. And I'm just going to say again, a welcome to everybody. Now, I know we've got new people on this evening, so a big welcome to you if you haven't come on the Maternity and Midwifery Hour. And if not, before, why haven't you? But welcome anyway. We have got old friends with us. I know we always do. And those of you who have been with us for a while will know that we started the Maternity and Midwifery Hour right at the beginning of the COVID-19 lockdown in March 2020. And that's 6 years ago, and I can hardly believe it. Sometimes it seems a lifetime away, and sometimes it just seems a moment in time. And it was really because, and those of you around, you'll remember, everything kind of closed down. And if you were in clinical practice, you had to focus on clinical practice. You couldn't go to conferences, study days, or festivals, anything, because that was all very much limited. And we really wanted to make sure that midwives had some sort of connection with other midwives, and student midwives had a connection also. And there was also at that time a great thirst for information about COVID specifically, but also to know what was going on all over the place, all over the country, and all over actually the world, while COVID was a big problem. So we started the Maternity Hour, and we've carried on. We're not doing so much about COVID now, but I have to say, remembering those early days, what was very special to me as a chair is really hearing the innovations and the real huge sacrifices that midwives and student midwives made at that time to make sure that mothers and pregnant women and families and babies were cared for with as much care and quality that could be provided, even though there were things that were really difficult, like not being able to necessarily have your partner all the way through the labour. That sort of thing was really hard. And it was hard for women, and it was hard for midwives also. Things have changed now, so we're looking at different things that of interest to midwives. And the other thing I have to say is everything that the Maternity and Midwifery Forum do is recorded. So if you should have a power cut or you have to rush off, don't panic. You'll get the end of the programme because you'll be sent the link to see it. Also, please do share it with your colleagues and you will learn things of great interest this evening. And you'll want to share it with your colleagues, especially if you're in students. You might want to take it into the university, and you're very welcome to do that. It makes a really good way of cementing the information in your brain and understanding it more, because I think that's how we as midwives work very well. We're very good at stories, and we're very good at talking and networking with each other and understanding things better. So do try that out, because it helps in your brain. Also very good if you're doing a revalidation process, because again, part of that is to have a reflective activity with other people to really share what you're learning and how it's going to change your practice. And I hope it will change your practice if you can. The other thing is that if you are all the things that are recorded are looked after by Mapflix, and you'll see that on the resources list that's part of the program. So if you are doing a project for university, or if you're doing something with the maternity unit, really good resource is going into Mapflix. Health warning. If you go into Mapflix, you will find it's so delicious that you'll find 2 or 3 hours might easily go by and you've looked at this presentation, that presentation, and the time has gone. So that's just a little warning. Make sure you've got some tea and biscuits while you're doing this, but it's worth doing. So check out with your university or check out with your maternity unit to see if you've got a subscription, and otherwise check out whether you want to have a personal subscription. It's not too expensive either. I'm not doing a big selling thing, but it's a good value, and we're always looking for good value. And I'm going to say at this point, because I always do, because I think that's what COVID does to me. Remembering COVID times, it makes me think we need to look after ourselves and we need to look after our people. And that means our colleagues, our students, our new students and our experienced students coming up for qualification. And of course, goes without saying, the women, the babies and the families that we're caring for. But look after yourselves as well. Now, news, I haven't got a huge amount of news. I think with all the things going on in the world, that has gone completely mad. And there's a lot of politics going on. I don't want to get into too many politics, but just to say, yesterday, Michelle Walsh, who's an MP, was appointed as National Maternity Advisor to the government. She is also, you probably know her from being part of the Nottingham Maternity Review, and she's obviously a mum as well, and has contributed into that review, and now she's in a different role. So we'll have to see how that kind of rolls out. I also found a really nice story, and I've kind of felt we need some nice stories. And this is from Staffordshire, where there's a specialist team and groups of midwives who've been running a maternity and screening bus scheme to go out to the community, where women might have to spend half an hour getting into the maternity unit, and they're just going along in their lovely jolly bus with all the things that they need, including vaccinations, if that's what women would require. I think they have to book for those. And I just thought that was a lovely thing that midwives are doing. And it just shows we're a very innovative lot, really. So good on you. Well done, Staffordshire. Now, there has been a lot of talk about trauma within the media, and it has huge impact. And we know that on women and families, and also on us as midwives. And there's a lot of difficulty in being able to unpack that with women. And in a busy service, women can also feel very anxious and a bit shy about asking questions. And maybe after the birth, for example, they think, well, I can't remember why this person did that or why that person did that. But they don't like to ask because everyone's so busy. So this is something that needs to be in our minds. So we're going to be hearing about, now it sounds quite complex in itself in a way, emotionally complex postnatal conversations. And this is when birth needs more than reassurance. And that is why we have the lovely Marie Watkins, and she started her career in the Royal Air Force. Then she trained as a midwife, hooray! And she graduated with a first-class degree and received a Clinical Excellence Award. And she's had a senior career specialising in clinical governance and patient safety, including roles as a former head of midwifery. And over the time, she's led and contributed to serious incident investigations, perinatal mortality reviews, and national audits of maternity care. And this has given a really clear view of what happens behind the scenes when care doesn't quite go to plan. And importantly, how often families are left without clear, honest explanations afterwards. She's the founder of Little Light Support, and will introduce us to the light approach to trauma-informed birth debriefing. So welcome, Marie. Thank you so much for coming this evening. The screen is now yours.
Thank you very much, Sue. That was an introduction like no other. And you've set all the scene for the birth debriefing stuff, so I can skip past my first slide there. Thank you so much. It was absolutely wonderful, and thank you so much for asking me, and thank you to all the people who've chosen to sit and listen to me on this sunny evening. So my name's Marie, and I would really like to spend this evening talking about those conversations that happen after birth. And Sue was exactly right. It does sound a bit complicated about the complex conversations, but the ones that I'm thinking about are the ones that don't resolve just because we've explained something and that we've offered facts. So I'm incredibly mindful that I'm in a room with professionals that will be no strangers at all to holding emotional complexity. And I'm certainly not here to demonise reassurance or suggest that it doesn't have a place, or to admonish the current system that I'm incredibly cognizant that you're all working in. But many of us, whether we have been taught implicitly or explicitly, have an understanding that if we reassure someone and we offer them clinical facts, that will metabolize their feelings in some way. But the work that I see in Little Light Support, where I'm providing independent birth debriefings, reassures me that often that doesn't work. And when it doesn't mean that it's a failure on your part, that you haven't explained things clearly enough. And it's certainly not because the person who's hearing that information is being difficult. What the disconnect is that you're offering a clinical answer to a question or a situation that isn't clinical. It's emotional and it's relational. And that leads me to the first of a couple of key points that I'll be hopeful that you might feel able to take away from tonight's session. And it's this, that it's not ever what happened clinically. It's how that event is interpreted. It's how it's remembered for that woman and how it's felt with her going forward. I'm very aware that I'm using the term woman. I'm using it with full respect for the whole diversity of birthing people, but for the purposes of me keeping to half an hour, which is the time that I'm allowed, I'm going to use the term woman. So leads me on quite nicely to explain that birth debriefing is rarely only about the facts, and people are not always asking for a timeline. So a chronology, an understanding of a sequence of events, can be helpful. It can help us to scaffold or structure a response, but often it's not quite what they need. So if I may, I'm going to offer an example to you about a debrief that I've anonymised enough that hopefully it's not going to be able for anybody to recognise. But it's a woman who came to me after she'd had an NHS debrief. She'd had a birth reflections or a birth afterthoughts conversation. The conversation hadn't met her need, and she'd been told at the end of the conversation, basically, if this hasn't helped you, then I can't help you anymore. You'll need to put in a complaint. So she did put in a complaint, and she received, a good 4-page response in answer to this complaint, and yet clearly still felt unresolved, because that's how we ended up meeting. So I'm just going to skip forward towards the end of her labour. So she didn't have a wonderful relationship with her midwife. They'd had a couple of, not clashes, but a couple of interactions where they potentially weren't on the same page. And then she described a situation where the midwife was performing a decision-making VE. And she's telling me this, and she's saying that she really remembers the midwife's head popping up from between her legs and saying, "You're going to need a C-section." And then she left the room. So I imagine everybody listening might have a response to that. It might have brought something up. And when she had her NHS debrief, the response to the story when she told that part of it was, well, that isn't the midwife's decision to make. And that's true. That's a fact. But that for me was a really good example, which is why I chose to share it with you, of answering an emotional question with a clinical fact. And shades of this conversation, or these types of conversation, happen all the time, which is why I've not made this presentation purely about birth debrief, because there's a spectrum for me of routine postnatal conversations that happen a lot, and then all the way up to, you know, formal complaint, review, investigation, debrief. And it was that space that I really felt needed some structure. So just while I was brainstorming and thinking about what I could share, these postnatal conversations were one of the things that kept falling into my mind. And it's a situation of thinking where a woman says potentially, I'm failing at feeding already. You know, it should be so natural. It was the only thing that I wanted to do. And she just keeps coming off, and people just keep telling me different things. And there's a range of response. So there's a response that says people are giving you advice, you know, based on what they see. Everyone feels like this at first, and especially when you're really tired. And then there's a response that says, I wonder if it might feel helpful if we think about the advice that you've heard before and then work out a way forward from there. Was last night a rough one? And we're going to go into a bit more depth as to the subtle difference between those responses, because they're garnering a similar sort of information pattern, but they're approaching it in a slightly different way. So just going to pause there because I want to just take a step back and share with you, if I may, although my slide is not advancing now. There's always some technical problem. Thank you. So these are the 3 threads that I've taken to build into one framework, one practice shift. And this has allowed me to build this framework for conversations that expand more than chronology. And these are the ones that I'd like to take the opportunity, if I may, to talk about each one in turn. So there's a thread that talks about complex incidents and a background in clinical governance. There's one that talks about mediation, and then there's one that's far more personal to me as a parent of an autistic daughter, and that's talking about safety in language. So my time in the latter half of my career, so the time spent as a matron and head of midwifery, was always with a governance focus. So I feel like I've spent a lot of time reviewing incidents and deciding, you know, within a wider team with the gavel as to which ones met the threshold for further review or investigation. Now, there's a whole other side conversation that we can have, which is about how fit for purpose that investigation and review process is when it's triggered, but that's going to take longer than I have here now. But what it left me thinking was that if you look at the serious incident review framework, or you look at PSERF, or you look at the MNSI criteria, the threshold to reach that is incredibly high. And while I was working hard to try and provide the best answers and the best service and the best reports for the women that had triggered this, it left me reflecting that there were actually tranches of women and families without a space to feel like they're entitled to ask questions. So it's a subtle difference between not having the space to ask the questions, but the space to feel like it's okay to ask. So I completely understand the pressures of the system, but I've also seen enough clinically justifiable sequence of events to understand that that can cause real harm, completely unintentionally, and sometimes completely unpredictably. I've seen so many staff deeply and understandably anxious about saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, potentially saying something that they feel is going to land them in legal hot water, that they fall into what I call a defensive language trench. And unfortunately, once you're in that trench, it's incredibly difficult to get yourself out of it. And what ends up happening is you end up doing a conversational equivalent of almost flinging things out of the trench and hoping that they might land, but there's no use in that. There's no positivity. So early conversations, skilled conversations with a framework can reduce the escalation and then hopefully, obviously, support learning. So that's the first strand that or thread that I'd asked to share with you. And then there's also the second slide, which is about when I qualified as a civil, commercial and workplace mediator. And I've just read a book recently, which I can share in the resources, which is about difficult conversations. And they talk about creating a third space. And as I was reading it, I was thinking that this is putting into words what I was taught to do and the skill that I try and practice in mediation. So when you're in a room, and we'll take birth debrief as an example, there's a space where the woman is, and that's a space where she holds her truth. That's her space. There's another space where the clinical notes describe what happened and clinical events. And then there's a third space that can be created, and that's the neutral mediation space. And that's the space where you comfortably sit shoulder to shoulder with the woman and you hold and you listen. And if you're going into a debrief and your intention is to try and alter someone's truth or try and correct someone's truth, then you're approaching it wrong, in my view. And we'll talk about it a little bit later on, where we talk about what to do if there potentially does need to be a correction to that understanding. But generally, it's a situation where you're saying, I can understand why that stayed with you, which isn't the same as saying everything that you say about this situation is factually correct. That's saying to a woman, gosh, that sounds really frightening, isn't the same as saying I agree the staff were being really cruel to you at that point. And I sort of like to imagine it, or I like to visualize it as a professional friend situation. So if you had a friend that said to you that they just had somebody bump into their car on a roundabout, I imagine that your initial reaction, your instinct would be to check that they're okay first, and find out how they're feeling, and then you might spend some time moaning about the state of other drivers and gathering the facts of what happened. Oh, my slides have stopped again. Here we are. But it would be an unusual situation if, when you were sharing that statement, if your friend said, well, I've driven on that road hundreds of times and I've never had a problem. Do you think it might have been something that you did? That would be an unusual response, but it's a response that sometimes I hear in birth debrief conversations. So that's thread 2. And thread 3 is the one that comes from a much more personal point of view for me, but it's one that's been incredibly influential in building the framework. And my slides aren't working again. So my daughter has autism, and part of her autistic profile is that she has a condition or a syndrome, if you like, called PDA. So a big shout out to if there's anybody else that's parenting a child with PDA out there, because we need some solidarity. But for those who aren't familiar with it, PDA stands for, in the textbooks, pathological demand avoidance. But it's being slightly taken over now and being replaced with the idea that it might sound better if we use the term persistent demand for autonomy. So this experience has really taught me about the importance of language and how we can use language to either empower or we can use it to shut down, and how inadvertently sometimes, we can use it to imply demand, imply pressure, or create a bit of a threat. So one of the main nuances in language for this is the difference between imperative language and declarative language. So imperative language, for anybody who's not familiar with the term, is that we need to do something. It's imperative. So if I'm saying to my daughter, Lucy, we need to leave the house at 8 o'clock, I have inadvertently there created a demand and a pressure and an expectation. But if I change the statement to be more declarative, I wonder if we might be able to consider leaving at 8 o'clock this morning. It's declarative. I'm declaring something. I'm wondering. So I'm just casting language out there, and you can choose to pick it up if it feels helpful. So when you're talking to somebody who's already approaching you in somewhat of a threatened state, so that can be pain, loss of control, loss of autonomy, all of these things that I'm sure feel incredibly familiar to you all, using imperative language in that those conversations can really amplify it. So this person with this language, but what am I asking of their nervous system? Because it's their nervous system that's primed to respond to you in that time. So it's not about being soft and flaky and having a permanent sympathetic head tilt. It's about being mindful that what you're doing is you're talking to somebody who's potentially in an altered state and the impact that your language can have on that. So those 3 threads came together, and I was thinking about what would it look like if we could take all the good bits from those. We could take clinical complexity and emotional impact and multiple perspectives and put it in a bucket of psychological safety. And what would that look like? And that was the design question, if you like. That synthesis resulted in me creating the LIGHT, the light model. So these 3 threads for me came together and created something that, yes, is a theoretical model, if you like, but it wasn't invented in isolation. So the light approach for me gives these conversations a holding structure. It isn't a model for therapy, and it doesn't substitute investigations or reviews or complaints, But what it represents for me is a structured way that we can hold an emotionally complex conversation. Each stage of the locate, the impact, gather, honour, transform, which we'll talk about a bit more in a minute, protects you as a practitioner and protects the woman against common conversational risks, which is rushing to the facts, rushing to the end, before we've taken time to create the space to understand meaning and understand the impact for that person. So I'm going to talk just briefly, because I haven't got a huge amount of time to go through it all in massive detail, about how each one of these stages individually comes together to hopefully provide a route from distress or confusion towards rebuilding that woman's agency and helping her feel supported. So each stage prevents the conversation from drifting. And I was reading a book recently by a woman called Brené Brown, who some of you might be familiar with. And she wrote something that was so incredibly perfect. It wasn't about birth debriefing, but it's so good that I'm going to apply it to the situation. And she was talking about how that in the absence of data, we will make up stories. So it's part of our human mind that we will seek to go back and we will fill those details in that we haven't got. And when you think about birth, for those of you who've given birth, and I'm sure there's enough people in the room that have been around birth, it can have the tendency to distort a timeline. So you can have hours and hours where you don't really know what was going on and who was in the room. And then you can have bits that are incredibly lucid. But sometimes those bits get jumbled up and you're left with a story that does have those gaps in it. And Brené Brown calls them like cracks in the story. And it gives the woman what Brown calls, and this is the bit that I really love, a stormy first draft. So they have a stormy first draft of their story, and that's what they're bringing to you. And unfortunately, motherhood being as it is, those gaps tend to get filled with fear, with guilt, with a bit of shame perhaps. And what Birth Debrief does, or what these conversations can do, is provide no space in those stormy first drafts for those feelings to get in. So you're not necessarily filling the gaps with rainbows and butterflies. It might not be a great story. It might also be a great story. But what you're doing is you're smoothing over that stormy first draft. You're giving a finished product. And that, for me, summed it up so beautifully that I couldn't not share it with you. So I like to think of the light model as the shape that I would like to be in my dreams, which is wider at the top, very skinny in the middle, and then wider at the end, like an hourglass shape. I'm just going to briefly talk through each one of the stages and talk about some of the language. It's not scripting, it's a sequence that I'm hopeful that you might be able to hold in your head. So locating prevents us from starting in the wrong place. And there's practical elements to it as well. So there's practical elements in terms of, if you think about when you go for a job interview, you will probably dress smartly. You'll make sure you're there on time, and you'll make sure that you're prepared. And it's a similar principle when you're going to a debrief or you're showing up for a conversation that's likely to be emotionally complex. Because what you're doing is, by preparing yourself, you're showing that that's important to you. So you want to set the tone for that woman to be in charge of the conversation. You want to show up prepared. But what you don't want to do is get into the drift of, I've read the notes already and I know what the problem is, or I've read the notes already and there's no cause for complaint here. So you're inviting the woman to locate where she'd like to start. So I wonder where it might feel most useful for us to begin. The impact invites you to demonstrate that you're really listening and to really quickly build that trust. So you're demonstrating that the woman's in full charge of the conversation you're having, but also that you are fully present. So you can use phrases like, I noticed that you use the phrase ABC. I noticed that you appear tearful when you're thinking about that. So you're offering something to her, you're suggesting something, you're being declarative, and asking her to start to narrow down that location, that wide bit at the top, coming down into impact. Then we move on to gather, and I'm aware I'm going fast because I'm watching the timer, so I can talk lots more about it if anybody's interested, but I am skipping through quite quickly. So in gathering, you're starting to look more closely at the details. You're starting to fill some of those gaps in to smooth over that stormy first draft. I wonder if it might feel helpful for us to reflect on what the clinical narrative is telling us at this point. So it's not interrogation, it's just taking a step to being more granular and using the notes as a bridge. So they're not a shield, they're not something to be behind and be defensive about. They're your bridge to understanding. Honouring prevents that validation stage from being skipped. So there is a temptation to move from the facts to, okay, sorted, right, let's move on. But you just need to revisit, just come out again, just slightly wider, and talk about the broader impact of that. So it sounds like it was deeply upsetting. It sounds like that would have been really frightening. And then to transform at the end, which sounds very grand, but I couldn't come up with another word that sounded appropriate, is reflecting back on where we started. I'm wondering how you feel now. How is this feeling for you? And this might be a conversation of all answers totally fine. It might be a conversation where actually, they still want to complain, they want to talk about that. Or it might be a conversation where you're starting to explore whether some more sort of therapeutic support with somebody who specialises in birth trauma might be more appropriate. So I'm just going to use a slight micro example here of a phrase that's thrown out all the time of why didn't anyone listen to me, or I feel like I wasn't heard. So a common reflex is to say the staff are working really hard to keep you and your baby safe. So true, but it can land as defense, it can land as minimization, it can land as a bit of a, I think of it as a squash. But thinking of it in a more sequential, more emotionally attuned declarative way, we might say it feels as though not being listened to is one of the parts that's important to talk about. I wonder if we might start there. So you're locating that distress before you start to dive down and start to gather some facts. So this is one of the key takeaways. So it's just about noticing if you're becoming defensive. So it's a bit like it is with bias, that you can't eradicate it because it's part of us, it's part of our human nature. But what you can do is start to notice if you're moving too quickly from explaining, you're starting to feel like they're being unfair to your colleagues, or they're being unfair when nothing really bad happened. So your goal here is not to rewrite their story. You're hopefully working alongside them to try and hold that differently. And what's really important is to try and not let your internal defense become your external response. So you can notice it, you can hold it. It's a big sign to just start to slow down a bit. But you can tell the truth without using facts from the notes as a weapon. So I just want to end to say that reassurance has a place, but they're not necessarily always seeking for somebody to reassure them out of their birth trauma or out of their confusion. These conversations, they invite us to locate that distress, to understand that impact, gather facts, honour the effect, and support that transformation, however that would look like. And that is what I mean when I urge us all to consider moving beyond reassurance. Thank you.
Fabulous, Marie. Thank you so much. I was just, as I was sort of listening to you talk about the defensive aspect. Gosh, that felt as though that probably is one of the trickiest.
Really is.
Because I mean, I think we are very practical people as midwives, and we tend to want to make it better and sort it really quickly. And this isn't something you can really do very quickly, I would say.
And I think it gets quicker, like any skill. I think that you can potentially, it's still a sequence, but you might be able to move forward through it a little bit quicker. But I completely acknowledge that it's one of the privileges of me working independently now, is that I have lost that. I've lost that defensiveness because I don't have any skin in the game, so to speak, anymore. I'm not really, reading notes that involve people that are dear to me. And if I was, then I'd probably be having a conversation about that before we started to say, I know some of the main characters in your play here. But it removes a lot for me. And so I'm not going into these conversations thinking, well, I know that consultant and I know they're great, or I don't want to say anything about this consultant because maybe I'm going to get in trouble, and also I have to carry on working with them on labour ward. That's going to be really difficult for me if I then say, actually, you've done, I don't think I agree with this, and then the woman goes off to complain, and perhaps that's written in a letter somewhere and it makes something awkward. So I completely acknowledge my my privilege in that situation of being able to be completely impartial, but it allows me to remove a lot of that defensiveness.
It's hard. I think it's hard. I can see that being tricky. Now we have some questions. Now, for those who are watching, I'm turning away every now and then because I've got two screens, and the questions come out on the other screen. And I have Celine. I want to welcome Celine because Celine's come from Quebec in Canada. So welcome, Celine. And Celine wants to know any advice for the midwife doing a debriefing time for a birth where she was the professional involved.
So,
good question, Celine.
Yes, bienvenue, Celine. So I've had a similar situation where I was involved in somebody's care. So as I was reading their notes, I was head of midwifery at the time, and I obviously had been really busy because I was out on the shop floor doing fresh eyes. So I'd been in and met this couple who then subsequently went on to have some questions. And I think it's a difficult one to advise on because I think it's really, really unique. But I would doff my hat really significantly if you were able to switch off your defensiveness to your own practice. I don't think that would necessarily be the easiest conversation for either the woman or for you, because it might feel a bit like she was inhibited, I think, from being able to, express potentially critical thoughts or, reflect on the relationship that you had with her as a midwife if you're sat face to face. So I would just urge you to think really carefully, and would be hopeful that there would be enough midwives around you in whatever capacity that would be, that you might be able to just say, look, I'm not sure this is going to be beneficial for you or enable you to feel the most comfortable. I wonder if it might be helpful if one of my colleagues took this and she will have a professional conversation with me about anything that she might think that I need to hear afterwards. I think that's how I would approach it. I don't know if that feels reasonable. That has answered your question, Celine.
Well, I suppose when you were talking, I was thinking, one of the things we always used to do when I was first as a midwife is I used to talk to the women after the birth or after any pattern of care, just to check out whether they understood everything, whether there was anything I didn't get right, whatever. But this sounds like more of a thing for women who've had real trauma and dealing with that different perspective.
Well,
it wouldn't be for every woman, or would it be?
Well, this is the thing, Sue. So I'm aware that and obviously the brief for what I was going to talk about today is leaning into the more emotionally complex birth trauma side of things. Because for me, I feel like potentially that's more of it's an easier win, but I'm using that term mindfully. It's an easier win to create a space for a woman to feel that she's entitled to ask for answers in a space where she perceives that some harm has happened or she's dissatisfied. So that for me is an easier group to say, we have this opportunity. But that's not to say that I haven't had situations where people have said, I don't think anything bad's happened. And that's often how they will start the conversation with me and saying, I'm not sure if you're the right person to talk to, or I'm not sure if I'm entitled to this. They want permission from you to say, no, it's absolutely fine. Even the most straightforward birth, you can have big gaps in it where you don't know. And it's nice to understand your story. It's nice to put in your box of memories of, how your time as a mum began, or, how your child was born. It's just nice to have that story. But I feel that they're definitely in the minority of people feeling justified to come forward and ask for answers or ask for clarity if they don't perceive that anything bad had happened. But obviously that then leads on to another conversation that we can have about our ideas of what a bad thing is and what a woman's idea of bad things are, because they're quite disparate generally. But no, absolutely, it's not fair. I would love to see it as part of, a standard postnatal offering, but we can dream a dream, because that's not going to happen anytime soon.
I know we're fighting to get 1 million more midwives in the whole world, and maybe we'll have a few more extra in the service, which would be lovely. We'll dream for now. Now, I have a question from Jane. Hi, Jane. Jane wants to know, what was the book called by Brené Brown?
I'll put it in the resources. It's something, thank you, Jane. It's called Atlas of the Heart.
Atlas of the Heart.
She's done quite a few books, which are all yes, appropriate. And like I say, it wasn't about birth trauma, but I was reading it and just thinking, this is it. This is stormy first drafts. This is amazing. And then I was thinking that it does happen all the time. It happens. Like they'll just make up things, and it's not a bad thing. It's just how our minds work. We just seek to understand, and when we don't understand, we'll put something in its place that helps us to understand.
Fit it all in.
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful. I think I'm going to have to have a look at that one. So that's more bedtime reading for me. Thank you. I've got a comment from T. Hi, T, who says, the part I loved is about holding space for two different stories. That's nice. Thank you, T. That's nice. And then Jane says, I think this is the same Jane, if I'm reviewing notes, you see something that's not a good standard of care, but the woman isn't bringing it up, would you talk about it, or would you suggest just focusing on the issue she raises? Very good question, Jane, I think.
It depends. So obviously there's a professional obligation if you've spotted something that you think either needs a Datex or whatever reporting system that you use, or something that is professionally concerning. So if you were reading something that you thought, actually, this is not, part of our NMC code of conduct, if you want to go down to, the basic level of things, then it's not, that's a truth, if you like, in the notes, or that's your interpretation of the truth. And what you're doing is sitting side by side with that woman and hearing her truth, hearing her conversation. So it might come up, but I'm not sure that I would see an enormous amount of value in saying, okay, well, these things feel like they're important to you, but also I just want to talk about this because, this bit here is not what we would have expected. I don't think, unless you feel like there's some serious harm there and you've got an obligation under the statute of duty of candour, that you're going to need to start having, but that's a whole other can of worms that you're going to open, which is fine and professionally appropriate to open, but that's different. I don't think that's a conversation sitting shoulder to shoulder with the woman. I think it's potentially a conversation that you might want to have with somebody internally to say, it's coming as part of this birth debrief. The woman doesn't seem to be too concerned about it, which is great. But for me as a professional, I find this worrying, and have a different conversation. But no, I don't think that it would be part of guiding her to see something that she's not already feeling.
That's really useful.
If that makes
Thank
sense.
you. No, that makes perfect sense. I mean, I was wondering how many. I mean, I love your metabolizing of feelings. I think that was
Yes,
lovely
I like
phrases.
that.
You use your language beautifully. I just wondered how many, with a woman, how many sessions would she need to kind of?
Yeah, I don't do more than one.
Okay.
So the process happens normally. They'll get in touch with me whichever way that happens. Facebook at the moment for some reason. And we'll have a conversation about accessing notes, so submitting a subject access request. There's also other sort of risk assessment conversations that we need to have in terms of PTSD and things, because that's not always going to be the right thing for somebody to access their notes unsupported, but that's there. And then they'll send their notes through. I'll have a really good read of their notes, and it's a nice little internal game that I play with myself of the over myself, that I think, I wonder what they're going to bring if we haven't had a really in-depth conversation, first of all, and sometimes we have, but if we haven't and it's a bit of a cold debrief, I think, I wonder what this is, because it will inevitably be something that I've not thought about in the notes. That's where the woman's leading that conversation. And we have, it's normally about 90 minutes. And I think if there's something unresolved at the end of that, I'm not the right person to carry on, because that is a conversation that potentially would fit more in a therapeutic space, or it's a conversation where they might want to see their GP, or they might, there's other. I think if they need more than that, then I'm not the person. This is a one-off. I will just say that on occasion, and they are like solar eclipses, but when they happen, they are wonderful, is that I've got like a bank of birth trauma specialist therapists that I've met enough times that I feel like I trust them, and the referral goes both ways. But sometimes we will have a three-way conversation where she's, the therapist has got a woman in her care that has come with something, but there's a clinical aspect to it. So the one most recently was, I was told I had to do ABC because my placenta was failing. I was told my placenta was failing. And it's a sticking point within the therapy journey that they can't really get past it because they don't really know what the explanation was. So when we have a conversation and we're in the same room, it's like I come in as an adjunct and we have that conversation. The therapist will hear something, the woman will hear something else, and I deliver it and then I leave. And that for me is a really perfect example of what a debrief can do. So it's not an ongoing process, it's a one-off, structured, hopefully useful conversation. And if they're not leaving with the clarity that they were hoping for, then that's part of my service, or part of the service that I would hope that everybody would be able to provide, is a bit of signposting after that, because I haven't got much more to offer. So that's I've done what I can. So it is, it's a one-stop shop.
No, that's fantastic. That's really helpful. Thank you. And I've got we've got We've got Elizabeth Wood. Hi, Elizabeth. Elizabeth says, do you feel it's beneficial for women to have these conversations on her own or with her baby and or partner?
So thank you, Elizabeth. Hello. I've seen the full spectrum, and I don't think that there is any evidence, or I've certainly not read any evidence I think it's completely up to the woman as to what feels most comfortable. Interestingly, from my point of view, so I do offer a partner debrief.
Okay.
But it's even less, it occurs even less than the solar eclipses that I was talking about. So I think if we've got enough of a job creating a space where women feel entitled to ask for answers, then men potentially is a bit further down the line, or partners, should I say, a bit further down the line. But interestingly, what will happen is the men will often be present, but in a sort of supporting actor kind of role, but they never really want to go, and they've got things to offer, and they want to listen, but it's not a formal, I'm going to sit in and have a debrief with you. I've seen, men that had left the room, and then the woman was saying, he's standing like he's still listening, not that I was going to say anything about it, but she's saying, oh, he's standing by the door. So obviously didn't quite feel able to be in the room, but still wanted to have part of that conversation. So I'm not sure I'm ever going to crack the partners feeling able to come and access, but I think it depends on the woman, really. Having the baby there is sometimes, well, it's nice for me because I get to see the babies, but sometimes nice for them, sometimes it's distracting, and sometimes it's nice to have 90 minutes protected time just to talk about yourself and your birth and your experience, and have the baby out of the house so you're not distracted. I can see benefits for all of it. I mean, just also as well, there's some women that come to me 22, 23 plus years down the line as well. So it's not really a thing for them to have their baby in their room anymore.
Oh, gosh.
I think they've been holding it for a long time.
Marie, we're going to have you back. I did say.
Oh, go on then. If you insist.
It's really funny, isn't it? Because I always say this is the fastest hour in the week, and this hour's just sped by so quickly. It's been fascinating, and I love this light model because I think it just puts it so simply in a way about what you can do, and you're easy to remember. Light. So we'll have a written test later.
Yes. Just a small one.
But I promise our audience, I'll twist Marie's arm so she comes back and we carry on the conversation, because this feels really useful for midwives and for students to understand, because I think what it really reinforces is the experience, and this is the woman's story. It's not our story, it's the woman's story. We're helping, perhaps we're contributing to it, especially if we're kind and we're nice, but it's the woman's story primarily. So thank you so much, Marie. Now I'm going to just say I want a big thank you first of all for Marie and for Angelo, who's at the back in the background. He's making sure this is all beautifully recorded. For those of you who want a podcast at 6 o'clock in the morning on Friday, also for the whole link for the whole thing on the newsletter. Now, for those of you who are new, if you haven't subscribed to the Maternity and Midwifery Forum newsletter, it's well worth doing so, because you get the links to the events, but also there's some quite good information about different news pieces, and there's always an article on each week, so that's really good. And also thank you to Paul for feeding the questions through to me so well. I actually forgot something, which was APEC, and that's the Association for Preeclampsia. I've got a free webinar in 3 days' time, and I've put the link on the resources sheet. It's free and it's going to be fantastic. So do access that. 3 days' time. And in the meantime, I'll say we also, actually, the other thing I nearly forgot was we have a little clip of some of the things from Midlands. I think it's a Midlands Voices on next. So I'm going to say cue Angelo for that. And in the meantime, take care, and we'll see you same time, same place next week, next Wednesday. And thank you again, Marie.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sue McDonald, and I've just finished chairing today's Maternity and Midwifery Festival in Solihull. And why weren't you here? It was great. I have to say, we had some fabulous speakers, some really interesting themes like communication and language, baby loss, postnatal care, and even birthplace choice. And there was something on every session that was of interest. And what I'm so pleased about is if you attend the festival, and this is one of the biggest things with the Maternity Midwifery Forum, you get the whole package at the end after the day, and you can catch up with all the things you've missed. So I'm looking forward to sitting over with a nice cup of tea and just catching up some of the things that I missed because I was chairing one session.
I think it was really educating and enlightening, especially around baby loss. That was a session I attended earlier. And congratulations to every person that won the awards, the Trailblazer and midwives that are doing amazing things. I think it's really nice, and I got to connect with organizations that are doing stuff to support mother and child. I found out about this baby nappy cream that I think is really amazing. I mean, I got to connect with other participants, and I really like it that people are doing great things to support mothers. I think this forum is a place where we learn and connect with other professionals.
I think the event's been a fantastic coming together of lots of like-minded individuals. I think there's a lot going on in the world of maternity at the moment, and hearing the amazing work that different people are doing in different spheres coming together, it is, you know, there could be a lot of cause for pessimism, but actually I found it really optimistic and uplifting day so far. So yeah, I'm really glad I came.
I am a very lucky recipient of a Trailblazer Award, thanks to my very dedicated team who nominated me. And it's very humbling to be presented that in front of a room full of people who are so passionate about midwifery and maternity services. And I have had a lovely day.
Oh, this event has been absolutely fantastic, and it's probably one of the only events that I've been to that really has got to the heart of midwifery practice, the cultural norms and the challenges that we all face, despite where you are, where you're practicing. I think it's really hitting on the essence of some of the challenges that we have at the moment, but also what midwifery is about. And that's about, with women, with the public, being human, and about the human cost of and the impact of both the professionals in it as well as for the communities that we serve.
It's been a really eventful day, lots of incredible speakers. It's really brought together the heart of the midwifery community, and I think it's really highlighting some of the situations, the current media and the events at the moment. So it's been really, really good.